Today I'm going to talk a bit about me. I'm Jules Whale, and I run a life coaching practice in Salisbury. And a lot of people ask, what do you get out of it? What are you putting into it? How did you get to do what you're doing now? And I think it's probably quite a good time to share a bit of my story. And if any part of it helps anybody, then that's good. That's what I want to happen. I didn't always do what I'm doing now. I wasn't always life coaching. I wasn't always insightful as I am now and working in a sort of world of therapy, if you will. I used to work in the corporate world. I was actually head of sales in a local company for 23 years. I had a nice sized sales team, 240, 250 people. To the outside world, I had a very successful life. I certainly had a successful career, if you can measure it in terms of remuneration and trappings, nice house, 4 grown-up children. Wasn't always quite as rosy as that. Going back a little bit, I was married to an addict, a compulsive gambler who throughout our life it was exciting, but not always in a good way. And at times it felt pretty desolate. The way I coped with my late husband's addiction, and I will go on and talk a little bit about his passing, but the way I coped with that was to build a fortress around me, a fortress of capability, of coping, of being successful in what I do. I had some good jobs. I was highly thought of in the corporate world, and with good reason. But at the time, I was living 2 lives, and one life got a heck of a lot harder, which weighed down the good life I was leading. And if that sounds a little bit odd to say 2 lives, I could almost draw a line between the 2 lives of how I came across, how I presented myself. I almost believed that if I got as successful as I could get, the evidence that I was gathering needed to be more and more and more, the evidence that I was a good person, that I was worth something. Living with an addict has its own challenges, and by the very nature of the selfish demands that the addict makes upon themselves, when that spills over into your life as well, it's very painful indeed. And there's been moments of humour. We used to live up in London, and I used to say to my children when they were very young, if Dad's friends come, say he's not in, but don't let them in. Well, they were actually bailiffs, they weren't Dad's friends at all. So we'd had a lifetime of debt and hardship. My belief was that if I was loyal and good and true and did everything as well as I could, that would offset the damage that was being done. And I don't think I realised at the time the extent of the depth of the hurt, the depth of the damage that is done to your esteem at times like that. We moved to the West Country and ended up in Salisbury. Actually, we were south of Salisbury. We didn't ever live in Salisbury as a couple. And I'd found myself working in, as I say, in the corporate world, with a good salary, a good company, and what that did was enable me to pay bills. It also enabled my husband to carry on doing what he was doing. The choices that I was making were the best I thought at the time. The choices were to stay put and keep the family home going. That was the choice I made, and carry on working to pay the bills and buy a house, which I managed to do, and all of it seemed okay. And I probably wouldn't have come to where I am now. Maybe I wouldn't. My husband was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. He was in his 40s, so we were both in our 40s, and he then completely descended into a deep dark hole of not working at all, and basically shut up shop and sat at home gambling all day long. So we were now down to one income, and it got very, very hard. Emotionally, he'd imploded and relied very heavily on me to prop him up. I think he despised and admired my capability in equal measures. I think he was resentful of my future. He knew he wasn't going to have a future, even though we didn't discuss it. I will say at this point that the hospice team were unbelievably supportive, and I thought at the time that you just kind of went in the hospice to die, and that was that. But actually they took me under their wing as well, and they were incredible. So I would just say as an aside, I can't thank them enough. He became psychotic with the drugs that he was taking, and life got pretty violent as well, and quite dangerous. I actually coped with that by going out for long drives and sitting by myself in a local golf course listening to music. I couldn't drink my way out of it because I needed to be on my guard, if you will, and alert. And apart from that, quite often in the night we needed to call paramedics, or I might have to take him to hospital. So I didn't drink. I didn't have any coping mechanism. I don't smoke. I ate absolutely loads and loads and loads and became pretty big. So that was the source of comfort. Carried on working, carried on doing my job really well. So the void between a normal life and the life I was leading grew and grew and grew. So it became almost as if the person that was at home was operating as a different person. That's the only way I could cope with it. He passed away 11 years ago, and I remember thinking, I'm free. That moment was very, very quickly replaced by, I'm free, but I didn't want it to happen like this. That brought about all sorts of sadness. I didn't feel that I was able to grieve normally because I had so many different emotions running through me. Relief as well as bitterness, as well as resentment, as well as regret, sadness, guilt, shame, all of that. For myself as well as him. So I was paddling around in, I can only describe it as a quagmire of sadness and misery. It was just miserable. I then realised through some paperwork that I uncovered that he was in debt for about 100 grand, which is a lot of money, and I had very little chance of paying that back. But I took advice from several people, and I decided that I was going to get in control of my life. I didn't know at that point how I was going to do it. I just knew that I didn't want to live with all of the feelings that I'd had before. So I decided to pay everybody back. I decided to contact all of the creditors and do what I thought was right. I didn't know at the time why I was doing that. I just knew that I had this inbuilt desire to make things right. So I created a plan. I created a plan that would get me out of debt and give me at least a financially secure future, if meagre compared to what I could have had. And that was the turning point. I started to read. I talked to somebody about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and she was practicing it. And prior to that, I must admit, I thought it was all a little bit airy-fairy. But she suggested a couple of books that I read, and I started reading about it. And it was almost like a light bulb turned on of how much we can do if we decide that's what we want to do. How much we can sort out our minds and get the best results. And so in doing that, I gradually came to the decision that once I'd actually repaid my debts, I needed to carry on working in my job to do that. I then uncovered all of the things that I wanted to do and all of the things that I hadn't had any control over, and I put it all right. And I got more and more understanding of how powerful NLP can be. And the more I learned, the more I understood it, the more creative I could be in how I wanted my path to be. So I made this plan. I made a 4-year plan that I would then leave my job in really good terms, really my terms, and I would have paid off everybody. I would need to sell the house in order to do that, which I did as well. That was part of the plan. And just that one act of getting in control of my destiny changed my whole future. I then studied NLP formally. I trained in it. I've since become a master practitioner in NLP. And the future that I have given myself, nobody's given it to me, the future I've given myself has been incredible. I am debt-free. I live the life I want to live. I want to enable other people to experience their best future. I want them to understand that however deep you can be in that quagmire, I can relate to that. There's nothing that you could tell me in a session that would upset or unnerve. There's every opportunity to lay everything out. And I think the first thing is being honest with yourself. Is this is where I'm at. This is how it is. Once I'd understood that you can't change what's happened, but you can actually change your relationship to it. Finding out what's important to you, finding out what you really want to happen, and then creating that is just the most joyous experience. It's the most incredibly powerful experience. And I decided that was my future. My future is completely revolved now around helping other people to find their future. And the first step has to be taking responsibility for ourselves. Once I'd done that, and it's not an easy journey, that's not the easiest part of the journey. And I say to people, you've done the hard bit now. You've understood it, you've taken responsibility for it. Don't get me wrong, when I was in my deepest, darkest moments, it was really comfortable to blame my husband. Everything was his fault. If you hadn't have done this, if I hadn't have put up with this, we could do that till the day we die, and lots of people do. But take away that living with somebody else's, as the cause of somebody else's doing. You would never ever find that peace. You would never ever find that tranquility. Once I'd accepted that I played a part in it, once I'd accepted that, and once I'd understood it, I could then make peace with everything that had happened and wind on to today. My relationship with my late husband is peaceful. It's one of love, it's one of respect, it's one of forgiveness, it's one of respect for me and him, it's one of forgiveness for him and me, and it's one of complete and utter peace. And when I used to think something good has to come out of this, something good has come out of it. Because if I can help one person to get from where they are to where they want to be, that's got to be good, hasn't it?